Hey everyone, Chloe here. So today I'm going to do the second part of my, discovering I was trans, how did I know I was trans series. If you haven't watched it yet, I will put a card up above for the first video in the series where I go into detail about my childhood. You don't necessarily have to watch that before watching this, but it is kind of a progression in my timeline of my life, so to speak, in discovering my trans identity. So last time, like I said, I talked about my childhood. So today we're going to talk about kind of my preteen and teenage years and the emotional struggles that I dealt with during that time. So, without further ado, the big focus here is going to be on processing the shame and guilt that I felt about these feelings that I had as, a preteen and a teenager. And in terms of these feelings, I mean these feelings of wanting to wake up every day as a woman, wanting to experience that, wanting to wear women's clothes and really express myself and just be myself. But, the thoughts that I had surrounding this and everything that everyone told me, that society told me, that the media told me it was unnatural. They told me it was a fetish. It told me it was a phase. Nobody told me this directly, but these were the signals and messages I was getting. Because you got to think in the, 90s and early 2000s, most of the exposure to trans people is a laughing stock. Like things like the Jerry Springer show, that's where you mostly saw trans people back then. So it's like, if I'm like them, I can't tell anyone, otherwise everyone's going to make fun of me. And all of this, during this process, I tried to just rationalize this as me being a cross-dresser, thinking that everyone had fantasies of what it would like to be the opposite sex. That's the thought I had at the time. Now I'd use the term like another gender. But, people had these fantasies, but they were just fantasies, and people never wanted to do anything about it. All this rationalization, internalization, shame and guilt that I had pent up, prevented me from telling a single person in my life about this until I was about 20 years old. Which, keeping this pent up for 20 years, keeping anything pent up for 20 years is pretty difficult. Throughout my teenage years, I experimented with exploring this side of myself through feminine expression, like trying on women's clothes. The most readily available clothing was my mom's clothes. And every time I did this, there would be like this feeling of liberation, this feeling that this just feels right. When I'd get to express like my feminine side, get to express the woman that is yearning to come out. And then, sometimes within minutes, sometimes it would take an hour, but it didn't take too long for this wave of guilt to wash over me. Something in my mind telling me, like, no, this is weird. No, I shouldn't be doing this. Why am I doing this? And then the experience would be ruined, and I would try to, like, stave myself off from ever doing it again. And, little did I know, these feelings of wanting to be a woman, of these feelings of being a woman, it wasn't a phase, obviously. And the feelings didn't diminish over time. They increased and increased and increased over time. Pardon if you can hear that. It's kind of storming in the background. Um, yeah, maybe like a metaphor for the storm of emotions that I was going through during my teenage years and my early 20s as well. Um, but yeah, it was like feelings of freedom followed by feelings of guilt, and it was kind of this vicious cycle. And I'd go through stages of where I'd be like, okay, I don't need to do this, and I'd maybe go like a month or a couple months and never wear women's clothes, and then I'd always come back to it, always come back to these feelings, and realize that, like, this isn't going away. And deep down, I knew I wasn't just a cross dresser. Like, deep down, I knew, like, I'd wanted to be a woman. And I think deep down I knew that cross-dressers don't actually want to be another gender. It's just a form of gender expression. But it was harder to admit that to myself or others especially, just because like there is more weight behind that, more permanence behind that, like changing so much of my life to live my life as the woman that I knew myself to be. um, and growing up during like middle school and high school, all of these struggles made me feel very disconnected from the people around me. um, I failed at pretending to be a guy. Like, I was still effeminate. A lot of people just thought I was queer and quiet. Um, yeah, I failed at pretending to be a guy, so I struggled to make friends with guys. I always got along better with girls, but I struggled to have close relationships with that many girls because of that kind of heteronormative stigma on being friends with somebody that's a different gender than you. Since the world saw me as a guy, it was kind of this heteronormative stigma of like, you're a guy, you can't be friends with girls, or if you're a girl, you can't be friends with guys. And it couples into like sexualization, it couples into safety, it couples into trust. Like, there's a lot of things that play into that, and it's just toxic heteronormative culture at play, and further internalization, which then just every experience I got to have that was like a girls' night just made it so much better, because it's just like, this feels right. I fit in here. But that just didn't happen often enough until, I started coming out. So, I mean, that's pretty much all I wanted to say about that. Is just, my teenage years, preteen and teenage years were really, characterized by being isolated and disconnected, because I couldn't be myself, internalizing tons of feelings of guilt and shame and trying to justify it as being a phase or me being a cross-dresser when I knew these things weren't true. Combating these feelings of liberation when I quote unquote gave in to my woman identity, that was then immediately contrasted by feelings of guilt when I gave in for too long. Um, and it was tormenting. Um, it's painful to even think about it now, but I've grown so much since then that I'm very willing to share this. And with that, I'd be curious to hear, anyone's experiences out there, any trans person who, had these kinds of experiences during their teenage years or any time in their life, and just, kind of what that was like to you, if you're willing to share, because I understand it can be very painful. As always, if you like the content I'm putting out there, please click the subscribe button, please click the notification bell, like and share. Like I said, this is an ongoing series, so go back and view the first video if you haven't done so already, and stay tuned for the next several that will be coming out soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye now.